Simple Insights, your best YouTube channel.
When after World War II, China and the Soviet Union began to converge, the United States realized that it could not hold this distant region alone, and thus communists might seize all of Asia. Therefore, the United States changed its policy toward Japan. Now the land of the rising sun was not an enemy, but a promising ally to cooperate with. Therefore, in February 1949, President Harry Truman sent to Japan Joseph Dodge, a former financial advisor of the occupation government in Germany. At his very first press conference, Dodge said that the Japanese economy is a man on stilts. One stilt is American assistance and the other is hidden budget subsidies to enterprises. They are too high, and you will soon fall. Therefore, the first thing the Americans did was force the Japanese government to cut subsidies to loss-making enterprises financed by the printing press. As a result, about 500,000 officials had to be dismissed. Many enterprises closed without state support, and without work, people had no money. And it is unknown how quickly these economic measures would have worked if the Korean War had not begun in 1950. And here's a very interesting story. Korea, which before the war had been a Japanese colony, after 1945 was divided into two parts, the northern part under Soviet occupation and the southern part under U.S. occupation. In essence, one people was divided into two camps, each with its own ideology and the belief that it represented a unified Korea. Therefore, in 1950, the North Korean army crossed the neighbor's border and, receiving support from the Soviet Union and China, began a war to reunify the country under its control. In response, the United States, so as not to hand the peninsula to the communists, supported South Korea. And under these conditions, Japan became an excellent staging base for the Americans, and the headquarters of the American command in the Korean War was located there. But how did all this help overcome unemployment and lift the economy? In that, Japanese enterprises were loaded with orders for the U.S. and South Korean armies. It was far and unprofitable to ship from the United States. Japanese production was many times cheaper. This close military-political cooperation and the recovery of Japan's economy led to the September 1951 peace treaty in San Francisco, which marked the end of the occupation. Japan once again became independent while renouncing its army, and its security was ensured by the United States, which left its military bases in the country. And so, by the early 1950s, the Japanese economy had fully recovered and was ready to conquer the world. Imagine that you are a small country with a growing economy and excellent relations with the world leader. What can you buy from it that would take you years to develop yourself? Of course, technology. There is the American Chemical Corporation, DuPont. In the 1930s, it invented nylon, an ultra-strong and elastic fiber used today for clothing and fabrics. DuPont spent 11 years and $25 million developing nylon, and in 1951, the Japanese company Toyo Rayon simply bought this patent for $7.5 million and earned around $90 million exporting nylon. And this was not a fluke, because the Japanese did not mindlessly buy patents and licenses. In 1950, the Japanese company TTK released the first domestic tape recorder. Its founder, Masaru Ibuka, understood that this recorder could be improved. It was only necessary to buy from the Americans the license for the transistor. That would not only make the product cheaper, but also make it many times smaller. After obtaining the license, physicists from TTK refined the transistor and in 1955 released the first portable radio receiver, TR-63, which was not only more compact than competitors but also much more reliable. And as soon as it came out, It captured not only the Japanese, but even the American market. 5 years later, the company applied the same technology and released its television set, which had no equal in the world in terms of image quality, durability, and portability. In fact, this product was as much a revolution in portable electronics as the first iPhone in 2007. By the time the TV was released, the company had changed its name, and so the case proudly bore a 4-letter word, Sony. And so, through the purchase of technology and its improvement, Japanese companies began to conquer the world. If the United States might refuse to sell patents to other countries, Japan had no such problems. First, it didn't seem a competitor, and second, it was one of America's key allies. It turned out that thanks to accessible technology, diligence, low labor costs, and a cheap currency, by the early 1970s, Japanese companies began to squeeze those who had not long ago taken Japan lightly. This concerned both home appliances and automobiles. Japanese goods were simply cheaper and of higher quality. Year after year, losing the competition, American enterprises incurred losses and laid off workers. Therefore, U.S. media increasingly criticized Japanese companies, and Congress actively lobbied for import tariffs to make Japanese goods more expensive. But tariffs are always dangerous. You impose yours, and the other side theirs. No one needs that. The United States had already had this experience during the Great Depression. A compromise was needed, so the United States decided to devalue its currency. The scheme was ingenious. At that time, as now, the whole world invested in dollars and the American economy, and therefore the dollar was the strongest currency, and American goods, due to the exchange rate alone, were so expensive that few bought them. Therefore, the U.S. proposed that its largest partners dump dollars on the market so that the dollar's exchange rate would fall. Overall, it was a unique agreement. Japan, France, West Germany, and the United Kingdom promised to sell part of their dollar reserves and raise interest rates, and the United States, on the contrary, to lower rates. Thanks to this, America could sell its goods more easily, while partners could invest in the United States at a favorable rate and import American goods and technologies at very good prices. It seemed everyone would only benefit. Therefore, in 1985, at New York's famous Plaza Hotel, the eponymous accord was signed, and this seemingly advantageous agreement would destroy Japan's economy. By the late 1980s, Japan fell into euphoria. The Japanese were buying American companies and inviting American stars to appear in local advertisements. Falling prices for foreign goods went to the heads of banks and speculators. Japanese megacities, Tokyo especially, became money magnets for the whole world. But Japan is a country with very little land. Population density there in 1986 was 334 people per square kilometer. For comparison, Germany, 223 people, the United States, 27, the USSR, 9, and even China, only 125. More only in such small countries as Monaco or South Korea. Therefore, Japanese real estate quickly soared in price. Demand exceeded supply many times, and following the rise in land and rent, the shares of Japanese companies also rose. Everyone wanted to invest in one of the most profitable markets in the world. By 1987, the average purchase price per square meter in Tokyo reached about $25,000. For that money, in the U.S., you could buy a brand new Chevrolet Corvette or a BMW 3 Series, and here you were paying that for a single square meter of office space. Banks were actively issuing loans, many of which went to buying stocks and real estate, which inflated the bubble. Naturally, these were completely inadequate prices. Investments flowed like a river, but not into research and development as before, into speculation and ever more expensive real estate. If, in the 1960s and 70s, Japan's economy grew thanks to a low base of imported technologies and their improvement, and then exports of perfect goods that beat all competitors. By the late 1980s, Japanese goods, due to the strengthening yen, were no longer so cheap. Before the Plaza Accord, a dollar bought about 250 yen. By 1990, about 150. Yes, Japan then had the most advanced technologies and the best quality goods, but as soon as prices for those goods rose, sales volumes fell, and so did exporters' profits, which had been pulling Japan's economy. To help exporters with cheap credit, the Bank of Japan pumped money into the economy. Loans were issued in huge quantities with real estate and stocks as collateral, already worth huge sums thanks to the inflated bubble. When the Bank of Japan realized that cheap money was going into speculation rather than economic growth, it began raising rates, but it was too late. As soon as rates rose, the rapid price growth on which speculators planned to earn stopped. They began selling stocks and real estate, causing the bubble in Japan's economy to deflate quickly. In just 5 years, Japanese stocks fell by more than half. Falling asset prices caused panic and reduced demand in Japan's economy, which fell into a deep crisis. When the Bank of Japan saw what it had done, it began supporting economic growth with low interest rates. But no matter how low it cut the rate, nothing changed. The Japanese were in no hurry to spend money because everyone understood that tomorrow prices would be even lower. Gradually, the central bank lowered the key rate to 0. That meant you could take a loan with no interest, but hardly anyone took it because everyone waited for prices to fall even further. Free money turned many companies into zombies. They are inefficient but remain alive thanks to free loans and government support. And today, almost every fifth Japanese company is like that. They are neither alive nor dead. The state does not allow them to go bankrupt, and companies do not fire workers, because that could lead to an even bigger crisis for which no one wants to take responsibility. Large Japanese firms such as Toyota, Sony, and Mitsubishi, which dominated in the 1960s-90s, began to lose competition to South Korea and China from the 2000s. In 1989, of the world's 50 most valuable companies, 32 were Japanese. Today, only Toyota remains on that list. Japan turned out to be like a person who won the lottery and could not manage the jackpot properly, because they had never held such sums before, while the whole world fights rising prices. Japan cannot push prices up. Yes, in certain bright periods in modern times, the government managed to raise inflation to 3%, but that is clearly not enough. For an economy to grow, you need stable price growth, and Japan's near-zero GDP growth clearly confirms this. And most uniquely, Japan cannot get out of this situation simply because, among developed economies, it has the oldest population in the world. Think about it. Every fifth Japanese person is over 65. At first glance, it is not clear what is so bad about that. But the elderly work less and consume less, and for the economy, that is as bad as it gets. The country's population is steadily aging because the future looks uncertain, and the cost of living is very high. But the standard of living is also high, so people live long. A vicious circle emerges in which there are more and more elderly and fewer children are born. And today Japan is a most unique country in every sense. People there expect not rising prices, but falling ones. The country's biggest tech companies from world leaders turn into local producers, and local businessmen pass away without passing on their life's work because they have no worthy successors. It seems the country has fallen into yet another pit, as has happened more than once in its history. But who will help it again become the world's greatest economy, and how soon might that happen? Based on your feedback, I'll decide whether to continue making videos like this. Take care of yourself and your capital.